Hello everyone, hopefully you can hear and see me. Welcome to this week's Sticky Notes. So for anyone who doesn't know, Sticky Notes is where every other Friday at 12:30 we share something about product strategy, design or research, and we usually spend about 15 minutes doing so. And you can watch along on, I think, LinkedIn and YouTube maybe. But today I'm going to be talking about a book called Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products by Nir Eyal. I thought I'd do kind of a mini book report and go through some of the key points in the book, specifically focusing on something called the Hooked model. But first, let's start with a little bit of background about Nir Eyal, because I always find it really interesting how people get into the world of UX, especially when they haven't ever been officially trained or educated in it. So he started out in the advertising and marketing industry and found a passion between the crossover of psychology and the success of businesses. Eventually, he moved to becoming a behavioral design consultant, which I think is kind of an interesting spin on user experience designer, but probably from a time when they didn't really have a name for it yet. But eventually, he became an author and speaker on the topic of building habit-forming products, which is where it led to the book that we are talking about today. So this book came about because he spent an awful lot of time of studying successful startups, really digging into why they were so successful, which eventually led to insights on how businesses have been influencing us as consumers' behavior in order to be successful. And that's when he came up with the creation of the Hooked model. So the Hooked model is a design pattern to create unprompted user engagement in order to connect the user's problem to the designer's product. Essentially, creating a user habit that cannot be carried out without the use of your product. There are 4 parts to the Hooked model: the trigger, the action, the variable reward, and the investment. How many of us have experienced the concept of grabbing your phone and opening up an app without really realizing why you decided to do it? You just kind of did. And that's because over time, perhaps without even realizing, you've built up a habit through the Hooked model. So let's take a look at how it works. So the first part is the trigger. And in order to get a user to engage with your product for the first time, you need something to prompt them to use it and also go to the next part, which is the action. Now, there are 2 types of triggers. We have external and internal. So the external trigger might be something like paid advertising, or maybe even word of mouth, a friend telling you about a really cool product that they've been using and wants you to try it out. Essentially something that doesn't come from the individual user themselves. Whereas the internal trigger is very specific to that individual user, and it's often emotional or behavioral. An example might be feeling like you're missing out, so you decide to open up Instagram or Twitter to kind of see what's going on. Now, in the beginning, you will need to make use of both types of triggers, but the idea is eventually the user will form a habit and will rely on the internal triggers to create the action. So you won't actually need as much external triggers anymore. And an example for that would be Instagram or Facebook. They don't really need any external trigger to remind you to use their product. They might have a few ads, but you don't really get emails and that kind of thing. So you probably just open it up as a habit as soon as you start to feel bored. Now, the second part is action. And as I said, the reason for the triggers is to promote the user to actually take the action that you want them to do. And the action should also be have a reward to encourage the users to take it, which is obviously the next part. But the action needs to be really easy to perform. And for it to be as successful as possible, you need to remove as many barriers to that action. And the reason for that is because if there's little friction in performing the action, it's a lot easier to repeat it. And that repetition is what is needed to form a habit for the user. A really great example that they used in the book is Snapchat. So Snapchat's tagline is share the moment. And if you think about it, all the user needs to do in order to share that moment is literally open up the app, because the very first screen is the camera open and ready for the user to take a photo. If we think about the app being designed in a different way, where they might have had a sort of home screen where they had to navigate to a create page and had to click a button in order to open the camera, that amount of time and energy wasted in getting to that very first action probably would mean that Snapchat wouldn't be where it is today. The third part is variable reward. So after taking an action, you'll want to reward the user. And this could be something like even just the relief from boredom after watching a very funny video. And some of you might be thinking, well, that kind of just sounds like the feedback loop, because all you're doing is rewarding someone and hoping that it would encourage them to do it again. However, the key part in the hooked model is the variable reward, because humans get bored very easily. And if you don't have the variable part, the reward over time becomes less exciting and they're less likely to do the action that you want them to do. And that's what makes the hooked model so addictive, is that cycle of, the reward might be different each time. It's basically the same behavioral design thing that makes gambling so addictive. Now, there are kind of three categories for the variable rewards. They discuss the hunt, which is when we thrive on hunting for information, and it's why so many of us enjoy trying to find the best deals and bargains and sales. We get a lot of satisfaction in hunting that process. The second one is the tribe. So this is just social validation and feeling connected to others. And we get a lot of sort of rewarding feeling from that. The third part is the self, and that is where we just want to be really good at things. We like achieving things, especially if they were really difficult to begin with. So something that would be a really good example of how they use this different types of rewards is TikTok. Because as you scroll, every time a new video appears, and the video could be funnier than the last one. It's often not, but there's always a chance it could be. And we enjoy that gamble of discovering the next really funny video. And that comes from the hunt reward. And then we go on to share it with friends and get that tribe reward when we get the message back that that video was like really, really funny. So we get that sense of achievement that we made our friends happy. So they're all kind of interconnected in that. Now, the final part is investment. So after the reward, you can ask the user to for like a small investment into your product or service, which they are far more likely to do after they've just received a reward. So what investment would you ask for? Well, the idea is that you want the user to do a little bit of work. And that is because as humans, we value our own work, a lot higher than anything else. So if we can get the user to do a bit of work that we can then store and attach to our product or service, their perception of like the value of your app and service is way higher. This is also known as the IKEA effect, because when you think about it, IKEA saves a ton of money by making consumers do all the building part of the process. But it also actually means that the person who bought the IKEA furniture values it far more because they put time, effort, and energy into making it. And that's what's known as the IKEA effect. This part of the hooked cycle is what locks users into your product and keeps it away from competitors. And Twitter is a really good example. They discuss this quite a bit in the book, but essentially Twitter is not a complicated service to build. And it can actually be replicated from a technical perspective in just a few days. And a company actually did that and tried to make the experience better. But nobody wanted to leave Twitter, even for a better experience, because of the investment and the value that had been stored over time in Twitter. They have like all the history of their tweets, what's happened in their lives, and all the interactions they've had with people and celebrities that they just don't want to lose, which is why they go back round in a continual loop of using the product and storing more and more investment with every use. So that's the hooked model. And of course, you might be not surprised by this question, but should we even use this? Because as you can tell by the title of the book, Hooked, we are also dealing with quite strong behavioral manipulation that could cause the user to go past the habit and go into addiction. So should we really be using the pattern at all? Like with everything I usually talk about, it comes down to the sort of morality, choices, and context of why you are using it and who you might be using your product or service. And there's actually a lot of talk around the addiction part of sort of apps, products, and technology being quite a small percentage of users overall, and that it should really be down to the individuals themselves to create barriers and manage their own sort of usage of apps and technology, which I personally disagree with, because I think it takes away all ownership and responsibility from the creators. And I also think the individuals involved aren't always aware of all the manipulation techniques that are being used. So if we take alcohol, for example, everyone is universally aware that it's not good for you and the effects that it can have on your body, and even perhaps the benefits. So they are educated in making the decision as to whether or not they need to put barriers in place or avoid it completely. And there's also more readily available support if you fall into that kind of addiction category, which is not really the case for like technology addiction. And as always, I think it just comes down to making sure that when we're using any of these techniques, if we decide to do them, that we're discussing it with other people. I think making the decision of whether this is right or wrong, should we not use it, doing that by yourself is where it can go wrong. You need input from other people, other perspectives to really kind of weigh out whether you should or shouldn't be using it, rather than just blindly using it as a manipulation technique because it will yield good results. We should always be questioning ourselves as to whether we should be using it at all. So yeah, that was a whistle-stop tour of Hooked. It's a very good book. I would definitely recommend checking it out. It's made me question my own usage of certain apps, and I'm trying my best to cut down on some of the social media ones, but it's really hard. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, let me know. There will be a slight delay, so I'm not sure. But if not, I can answer any questions afterwards. Okay. Well, thank you very much, and hopefully see you at the next Sticky Notes.